nerds, what's up? Today I want to talk about something I've actually been thinking about for over a year, but I've had a hard time figuring out how to articulate. And that is the thought that the ideas being expressed in SFF recently are becoming a lot less subtle. The idea being that when you read a novel that is trying to make a point or make a statement or make you think about something, that the ideas are becoming very obvious, almost just like constantly hitting you over the head with the idea constantly to make sure you really get it. Instead of requiring any sort of critical thinking, these novels are telling you what to think rather than presenting you with some ideas and letting you come up with conclusions on your own. I first really started thinking about this after I made that video where I read all of the 2010's Hugo Award winners. I've noticed that probably in the past decade, I'd say most of the Hugo nominations and wins tend to go to what I would call SFF with a purpose. It's SFF that's trying to address current cultural concerns. That's kind of an important part, I think, of the Hugo Awards. But as I was reading some of the newer installments, I was just really feeling like they were becoming very obvious. I was shocked at how kind of over the head a lot of these ideas were being presented in these winners. I had this complaint in particular about the calculating stars, but I've also had it about other books I've read, like A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers, which now that I'm thinking about it, actually I think did also win a Hugo for Best Novella, and also a non-fantasy book I read, which was The Firekeeper's Daughter. What was the most interesting about this is that these books actually were presenting ideas I agreed with, so it wasn't like I was annoyed because they were ideas I didn't like. I liked the ideas, and I still thought they were too obvious. They were too unsubtle, and so I didn't enjoy it. Of course, the problem with this feeling is that it's A, not measurable, and B, extremely subjective. So how do I go about talking about something like that? Today in this video, I kind of want to present several thoughts and ideas I have about the subject, but I am not trying to present the opinion. Instead, I want to more open a conversation between you guys and try to figure out maybe if this is a trend, if it's all in my head, or what you guys think are contributing or not contributing to this. I'm hoping this will be more of a discussion starter than an answer. So in this video today, we're going to talk about some elements that I think are contributing to this, starting off with a conversation about the term a death of an author. Then we're going to move into how media influences things today and media literacy overall, and then kind of end on talking about reading as a hobby versus reading as a skill. So let's get to it. See you after the jump. The Death of the Author, or as titled in its original French, excuse my butchering, La Mort de l'Auteur, is an essay that was written in 1967 by the literary critic Roland Barthes, and in my opinion is probably one of the more misunderstood phrases in today's lexicon. Often today, people use the term death of an author to mean something like, I don't agree with the author's politics, but I still want to read the book, or I don't agree with the stuff this author did in life, or their opinions they express, but I want to still love and enjoy what they wrote. And that honestly really has nothing to do with the original intended meaning of the phrase death of the author. The essay was actually a statement about literary analysis and how we derive meaning from the books that we read. In particular, Barthes argued that we shouldn't have to look for a definitive meaning for a work, that we shouldn't seek definitive explanations by studying an author's history, biography, or intended meaning to come up with the answer. But rather, we should let readers also interpret the text based on their thoughts. It's important to view this essay within the historical context of the time that it was published, in which literary analysis really generally only focused on the true meaning that the author intended, and that when you were studying text, you were studying the author's history, biography, everything they said to determine the meaning. They really weren't concerned with just someone averagely picking up the text and what they thought about it. There was some higher true meaning. One of my favorite quotes from the translated essay reads as follows and is talking about how not allowing readers to bring in their own interpretations makes the text suffer. It reads, "The unity of a text is not in its origin, it is in its destination. But this destination can no longer be personal. The reader is a man without history, without biography, without psychology. He is only that someone who holds gathered into a single field all the paths of which the text is constituted. This is why it is absurd to hear the new writing condemned in the name of a humanism which hypocritically appoints itself the champion of the reader's rights. The reader has never been the concern of classical criticism. For it, there is no other man in literature but the one who writes. We are now beginning to be the dupes no longer of such antiphrases, by which our society proudly champions precisely what it dismisses, ignores, smothers, or destroys. We know that to restore to writing its future, we must reverse its myth. The birth of the reader must be ransomed by the death of the author. You may need to pause to read that quote over. I know it's a lot, but I really just loved how he phrased it. I loved the idea of, hey, readers come in to a text with their own history, their own biography, their own psychology, their own feelings and thoughts. And that shouldn't be dismissed as invalid, that everyone can have their own individual connection to this text outside of just the author's intended meaning. This ability enriches and enlivens the text and the interpretation. Now, this idea of anything but death of the author probably seems pretty foreign to modern readers. I feel like today we're all about the personal interpretation with the way we engage with fandoms and fan fiction, all the things that we do online. It's deeply about personal connection to a text. Now, I do think we've kind of found probably a good happy medium today, because I feel like when I go into a text, I usually consider both. I have my own feelings about how I viewed it and what I liked or didn't like, but often in many works, I feel like I do need to go look up some historical context or biography about the author to understand what they're trying to say. And I think you can use both of them together. I don't think they're these disparate ideas that can't hold water together. You can both consider author's intentions and your own influences as you read a book. So at this point, you're probably like, okay, Bookborn, so what? Get to the point. Well, the reason I think that the meaning behind the death of the author keeps shifting is the internet. I feel like I say that a lot on this channel, huh? We have more access to authors and their opinions and their feelings than ever before. Think contextually of what kind of access you had to authors when this essay was originally written in 1967. Perhaps if an author was deceased and they were pretty famous, you would have like an official biography about them. You might also have a lot of magazine or newspaper articles about living authors, but they were probably pretty pointedly about works, or if they were about the author's life, they were interviews that the author was maybe controlling. The news cycle wasn't very quick, right? It was printed material. We weren't posting things a mile a minute on the internet. And if you wanted to interact with authors, it was probably pretty limited in the fact that these authors weren't giving out their phone numbers. You either probably had to see them at some sort of event, which were, I'm guessing, pretty limited, or write them snail mail, which the author could ignore probably pretty easily. Contrast that to today, where most authors have not only one, but multiple social media accounts, sharing opinions on whatever they want, including thoughts, ideas, and processes for their novels. Fans have a direct line of communication through messaging or commenting on posts, or even more in some authors' cases with like consistent AMAs. And those kind of comments are probably read by most of the authors unless they have amazing self-control. But that also means that if readers missed the point of your novel or misinterpreted something, you're probably going to hear about it a lot. Perhaps people will make posts and spread things about you on social media, on Reddit. Then news publications will pick it up because, as you see a lot, they just kind of run with something and then multiple news cycles grab it. And maybe you'll be extremely concerned that this is going to affect your livelihood, your image, that these will spread things that you feel are not true about your works or who you are. Look, I can't prove anything, but I have wondered a lot if this is what's contributing to the lack of subtlety. Are authors scared now to be misinterpreted? Are they worried that if they aren't perfectly clear what point they're trying to get across, that it can ruin their image because these cycles happen so much faster? Are they worried they'll have to reckon with a brand that they don't feel is really representative of them, or worried about just like the optics of having to deal with like all the angry messages? I was kind of thinking about Kindred by Octavia Butler, which is just a fantastic novel, but it's also a very difficult novel. When I read that, it made me think a lot. Like, I was thinking about my own interpretation of it and what it meant, and I did a lot of studying about it, and I read a lot of reviews. And one thing I noticed was that a lot of reviews kind of thought that this book was like pro-slavery, or at the very least was trying to like sympathize with abusers, which when you read kind of Octavia's words on it and some of the analysis, you realize isn't the case. But, you know, when Octavia Butler wrote this, she didn't have to read the Reddit post about that or all the Goodreads reviews about it. You know, we were interacting with stuff so differently. And I wonder if that is why there's maybe sometimes a lack of courage today to be a little more subtle. Anyway, I don't think this is like totally it. I don't think this is the only reason, but I do wonder if it is a part of the reason, if it is contributing to it, especially since not only do we have more access to authors than ever before, but also access to other fans more than ever before. It's almost like there has never been a time in which we are more in tune with authors' opinions and intents and thoughts, and also more creating our own responses to books. It's like somehow an extreme of both at the same time. The internet has just changed the way we interact with works. So another thing I wanted to explore with this kind of lack of subtlety, or as I see it, a lack of subtlety, is do we think this has anything to do with kind of the general feeling that critical thinking skills are dwindling? Now, I've done a couple of videos on literacy. I did a video and then I did a live also with Alan from the Library of Alexandria about it. And it definitely, people have this feeling that critical thinking is going downhill and attention spans are going downhill. And there is statistical proof that literacy is falling. Now, the reasons for this are usually pretty complicated and hard to just like point to specific things. I don't think we can really say we definitively know why it's happening. And I'm just wondering if this idea maybe plays into the idea that people don't want to work as hard for what they're reading. They don't want to have to think as hard. They just kind of want it presented to them. Now, before I continue on this train of thought, let me be explicitly clear. I do not think everything you read has to be some deep philosophical venture. Obviously, reading for fun is necessary, fun, vital, amazing. I mean, have you been on my channel? It's not exactly like I'm reading Haikyuu or The Martian for some deep-rooted introspection. I love reading for fun. Everyone should read for fun. I am talking right now of the specific experience of reading novels that are clearly tended to make a point or make you think or challenge ideas. I am not saying that every book needs to do that. Absolutely not. So while I was trying to research this whole lack of subtlety idea, I actually came across an article that was arguing the exact opposite of me, that actually art should be less subtle and obvious art is great. I will link that article below because I actually think it makes a lot of extremely compelling points in that favor. But there was one thing I wanted to talk about that I actually very much disagreed with in the article, and that is when this article claimed that there is no evidence that critical thinking is improved by reading. And it's linked several studies or articles about studies. Obviously, you know, I went and read the studies. And when I went and read them, I saw that this author made a very classical mistake when interpreting statistical results. The studies don't say there is no evidence. The studies actually say that you can't tell. And those are actually two very different things when we talk about statistics. So yes, I am about to get on my statistics garbage again. Although those sound very similar, one is making a conclusion and one is not. Saying that there is no correlation or that there is correlation are both statistically significant findings. It means that the numbers tell us there either is no connection or there is a connection. Rather, saying there is no evidence or we cannot tell either way if there's a connection is saying that the numbers weren't significant enough to prove it either way, which again, very different. To give some more concrete examples in the study, one study mentions that they found that people who scored higher empathy could name more novelists. And one connection they wanted to make was, oh, reading makes people more empathetic. But the problem with that is they said, well, what if the other way is the thing that's actually true? It's just that more empathetic people tend to be more drawn to reading. And the same thing happens with critical thinking. Perhaps reading improves critical thinking, or perhaps naturally more intelligent people are drawn to reading. This isn't reading doesn't improve critical thinking. This is we can't really tell if they're related or not. There are too many variables to give conclusive answers. And of course, that totally makes sense. There are so many lurking and confounding variables in these kind of studies, and these studies tend to rely on self-reporting, which is notoriously inaccurate. Unfortunately, the science of reading is just extremely difficult to measure. We really just don't have good data or good ways to separate variables. I still think we can make some guesses though, or some suppositions, which is that usually practicing something or working on something makes you better at it. If we're gonna use a silly example, have any of you been around here since the start of my YouTube journey? If you have, hopefully you've noticed a big increase in skill. If you go back and watch like one of my first videos, you'll probably look at audio quality, editing quality, video quality, even just the way I present myself and talk. I would say in the past 3 years, I have grown quite a bit. Now, I didn't take any formal classes about this. I didn't even do any studying in the classical sense, but I did make a video every week for 3 years, and it taught me a lot, and in my opinion, I got a lot better at it. So if I'm reading stories and I force myself to stop and think about them, ponder them, do some research, think about how I feel, maybe write something about it, doesn't it follow that the more I do that, the easier it'll be for me to think through things like that? So then the question I guess becomes, well, does getting better at reading even matter? And I think it depends what kind of reading we're talking about. I actually think there are two different things we talk about when we use the term reading. There is reading as a hobby and reading as a skill. Now, I have done a lot of research on learning to read because I have children who I wanted to teach to read. And one of the most interesting things I learned while doing this research was I read a fascinating article about how the person writing this often heard people say, I have a 3-year-old reading at a 2nd grade level. And they talked about how what those parents really meant was that their 3-year-old could decode at a 2nd grade level. They could read the words, but the researcher found that these children often weren't comprehending at a 2nd grade level. And that reading is not just decoding. Reading is also being able to comprehend what you are reading. So these children could pronounce the words correctly, could read the individual words, but they might get to the end of a sentence and not be able to tell you at all anything that they read. And that's not actually reading at that level. Comprehension is a vital part of the reading skill. It's important that comprehension is kept up with as a child increases their decoding skills. And I see this when I'm getting reports back about my son from school. When you get like their Lexile level and their estimated grade level for reading, it is a composite score based on 3 things, which is decoding, comprehension, and vocabulary, because all 3 of those things together is what the skill of reading actually is. And this is one of the reasons I think that when you do any sort of research on literacy rates, you often see the term functionally illiterate, because it's not necessarily that people can't decode the words. I think it's a lot of the fact that they can't comprehend or usefully use the information that they are reading. My guess it's the same thing like when you hear that the average adult has a reading skill of the average 5th grader. Once again, it probably has a lot more to do with comprehension and vocabulary than just pure decoding the words. Because the truth is, outside of reading for fun and as a hobby, reading is literally one of the most vital skills you have, to navigate our world. And I think we don't even realize how important it is. Think of how much you need to be able to comprehend things to vote, to do a job application, opening a banking account, signing a lease or mortgage. My 90-page mortgage document was one of the worst and most difficult things I've ever had to read and try to understand. Almost every job, even jobs you think you don't need a lot of schooling for, probably have a reading element to them that would increase your skill or increase your ability to do that job. It also influences how well you can learn other skills. To use a really silly and simple example, my son learned to read relatively early, and once he learned to read, all of a sudden all these things were open to him. For example, board games. So many board games rely on reading. So at a young age, we were playing more advanced board games with him, which helped him learn a lot of strategy and also a lot of math, because so many board games require math. And so those skills started becoming advanced for his age because it started with reading. And my daughter, who hasn't been interested in reading at a young age like my son, we haven't been able to develop those skills at an accelerated rate either, because so many of the ways to teach those other skills rely first on the skill of being able to read. And it's been really interesting to see that dichotomy. My point being, wow, I've had to probably say that too much in this video, is that we can't just say it doesn't matter. It does matter. At some point, learning to read, learning to comprehend the things that are around us and comprehend the things we're reading is going to affect every area of our lives. So what now? What does it all mean? How am I going to conclude and kind of wrap together all these thoughts? I think what I'm trying to say is, I think media is affecting and changing the way that we read and interact with works. And I worry that that interaction is one of the reasons that works are becoming less subtle and requiring less thinking from their readers. When we think about reading, we need to understand that it's not just a hobby, but it's also a skill that affects our lives. And maybe ask the question, what are we doing to increase our critical thinking skills? What are we doing to increase that? And honestly, this is a question I think about a lot for myself. Now that I haven't been in school for so long, in school it just felt so easy to be challenged because you were just being challenged constantly in those ways. But now that I'm outside of it, what am I doing to increase that? And if reading isn't proven to increase critical thinking skills, then what does? What should I be doing? Playing chess? I don't know. And how am I going to continually develop those skills in my life so that I don't lose it? Once again, not in favor of not reading for fun, but I do think I'm earning something useful when I am reading things that challenge me. Even simple things like I read a short story collection by Neil Gaiman recently, and one of the stories really made me pause. I had just put down the book. I really thought about it for a while. I was thinking what did this mean? Was that metaphorical? Was it not? I looked up reviews. What were other people thinking? I looked up his thoughts on what he was thinking while he read it. And that kind of analysis, that kind of process while thinking about that text, I feel deepened my appreciation for it, deepened my understanding, and was kind of stretching some sort of muscle. And so I just want to make sure I'm allowing myself to have those experiences as well as the fun experiences for me personally. It's also why I'm hesitant when a lot of people these days are like, English classes suck. Sometimes the curtains really are just blue. I get it. A lot of English classes can sometimes go overboard in the whole analysis thing. And I absolutely believe and champion the idea of getting the books kids love into their hands, books that they will enjoy so that they enjoy reading. But I also don't think we need to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I think there is a way to both recognize that having kids develop reading for fun skills and loving what they're reading is as important as also sometimes challenging kids with things that maybe aren't as exciting or interesting, but challenges them to critically think about what they're reading and how metaphors work and how we can analyze a text. Both of those things I think have a place. Okay, those are my thoughts. I hope they made any sort of sense because I feel there were lots of disparate ideas there. What I'd love for you to tell me, if you don't already have a million ideas, is have you noticed this lack of subtlety, or are you no, I don't even think it's a problem? Because maybe you don't, and then this whole video is worthless. Let me know what you think about how social media or access to authors may be changing how things are written. Tell me if you think I made some good points about that, or if you have different points. Tell me if I missed a point on here that you think might be contributing to lack of subtlety. Either way, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And as always, if you like these kind of deep dive videos, please like and subscribe. That is the best way to support me. And if you want to see what I am currently reading, as well as other nerdy rants or participate in polls, you can do that on my Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye.